It's hard to say, but there does seem to be an element of personality, probably on both sides. President Erdogan is clearly a headstrong leader. He has been pushing Washington, and he has come to Washington and talked about the coup 2 years ago, and made it very clear that he's been entirely within his rights. What would you do if this happened to you, etc. The Turkish government has been resistant to criticism. They've been very unwilling to compromise. There have been some, clashes, not clashes, but disagreements on the Syrian Kurds, as the Americans have tried to lead a coalition against ISIS. They have not cooperated on that. And the elections that took place in June, I think many Americans were a bit worried that Turkey is taking more of an authoritarian turn. There were questions about how many of the polling places were moved, 1,000 of them, in rural areas, so that people really couldn't go to the polls, and that got Mr. Erdogan over the 50% mark. So he didn't have a second ballot. They're now looking to buy Russian air defense, the S-400, and they're claiming they could keep it away from NATO, but I'm very skeptical of that. So there are a lot of little irritants in the relationship. And now this Christian pastor, who has been detained for about 2 years and is in bad health, has become a real issue at a time when the president and the vice president have embraced the idea of religious freedom. They had a conference last month, and this has just simply been a trigger for perhaps some tensions that have been welling up between them. Having said that, the question is, can the personalities get on the phone or meet and solve this? And I wonder if that's the case. So I don't think Americans want to see Turkey suffer economically.
No, and certainly it's not in the U.S.'s interest, I would imagine, when it comes to national security. President Trump tweeting about the additional tariffs he put on Turkey at the end of last week also noted that the currency was plummeting. But surely the U.S. administration doesn't want to see an economic crisis in a country coming from a NATO ally, in fact.
No, they don't. But, I mean, I was there in government when we tried to bring a division of U.S. forces in to Iraq from the north, and the Turks held out and ultimately said no. And so, there are high sensitivities in Turkey about the use of their facilities. I'd say that Turkey's role within NATO was a little bit smoother in previous eras. It's been a little harder in recent times. Turkey has broadened its relationships with around the world in different directions. Yep. And their relations with Israel are very poor, which probably doesn't weigh very well in this White House. And so, this is something which I think is fixable. Yes, the NATO alliance is extremely important, and I think both sides have a lot to lose if they allow this to go on too long. But there's a lot of pride, it seems to me, frankly, on both sides of this equation at the highest levels. And frankly, the Turks should think strategically and do what's best for themselves. And it's not always an issue of national pride. It's their economy is in tough shape. They've detained an awful lot of people, including journalists who are well regarded in Washington, people who are not considered to be coup plotters. So there's real skepticism over whether all these people should be in jail 2 years after the coup. So I think there's work to be done here, frankly, and I hope diplomacy can help.
You mentioned this controversy around Turkey accepting the Russian defense system. That has irked many in Washington. Also concerns that they're just cozying up to Russia more and more here. Do you think that they will seek Russia's help in the current economic situation? What kind of help could Russia provide?
Well, they are already seeking, I think, Russia's help in this crisis, if my information is correct. And in the short term, I mean, there may be financial things that can be done. There may be increases in trade. Countries turn to alternatives when prices change radically. We see this in a number of situations around the world. Russia's not a very large economy, and there's long term, Turkey needs to be plugged into the Western economy. And I think President Trump recognizes that and is basically saying, enough is enough with all of these different things. There has to be some reasonableness. You just can't go around, insisting on your way on all these issues and stepping on a lot of toes. I think there's a feeling in Washington that President Erdogan needs to be a little more conciliatory, a little more flexible, and that under those circumstances, we can get everything, including the NATO alliance, back in good order. And I think that's the hope that we will do so, because in Syria, there is this anticipation of a bloody attack by the Assad regime up near the Turkish border in Idlib, and it's really important for the U.S. and Turkey to cooperate from a humanitarian standpoint and to control this conflict.
Hey everybody, it's Hadley Gamble from our new CNBC Middle East Bureau in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for stopping by. Now to watch more, you can try one of the videos that just popped up on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe.